Lena Parker's footsteps echoed through the sterile hospital corridor, each step faster than the last. The usual calm of the hospital was disrupted by an unsettling feeling that lingered in the air, making her stomach churn. She pulled out her phone, her eyes scanning the screen, as if to make sense of the message she had received earlier. It was from her father, a renowned but aging neurologist who had always been a pillar of strength in their family. The text was short, cryptic, and completely out of character. "We need to talk. The family should gather tonight. There's something important." The words played over and over in her mind, each one adding a layer to the growing knot in her chest. It wasn't like her father to sound this way. Urgent, secretive. Lena paused for a moment as she passed the nurse's station, offering a distracted smile to a patient who greeted her. The familiar faces and routines should have comforted her, but today, they only heightened her sense of unease. Shaking off the feeling, she continued to the break room, trying to push her worries aside. But her thoughts inevitably drifted to Emily, her sister, the source of so much tension in their family. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since their mother's passing. The last time Lena saw Emily was at the hospital, during their mother's final days. Instead of being there to help, Emily had made a scene, avoiding responsibility for their mother's care. The bitterness from that moment had never truly faded. Lena's mind wandered back to those final days with her mother, who had fought a long, brutal battle with cancer. It was Lena who had stayed by her side, juggling shifts at the hospital while also managing her mother's medical care. It was Lena who had held her mother's hand as she slipped away. And it was Lena who had been left with the overwhelming emotional weight of it all, while Emily retreated. The sense of betrayal was still fresh in Lena's heart, and now, this unexpected message from her father, it only added to the storm of confusion and dread building inside her. What could he possibly want from all of them now? It wasn't always like this. Lena and Emily had once been inseparable, a bond so strong it seemed unbreakable. As children, they shared everything. Childhood secrets, laughter, even the love of their mother's famous cinnamon rolls. The smell of those rolls still lingered in Lena's memory, a reminder of simpler times when life felt warm and safe. But that was before their mother fell ill, before the darkness slowly crept into their family, changing everything. Lena had always admired her mother's selflessness, her unwavering ability to care for others despite her own struggles. So, it was only natural that Lena would follow in her footsteps, dedicating her life to becoming a nurse. The long hours, the exhausting shifts, they were all worth it to Lena. It felt like a calling, a way to honor her mother's legacy. Emily, on the other hand, had chosen a very different path. While Lena worked tirelessly to save lives, Emily had carved out a life of glamour and luxury. She married Ethan, a wealthy real estate mogul who seemed to have it all: money, power, and an insatiable hunger for more. He epitomized everything Lena had never wanted: his flashy lifestyle, his penchant for social gatherings. It all felt so foreign to Lena, who had learned to find contentment in quieter, more meaningful things. As their mother's condition worsened, Emily's visits grew less and less frequent. Where Lena spent her days balancing hospital shifts with caring for their mother, Emily was always too busy, attending parties, taking extravagant trips, flaunting her new life. She seemed to have no time for anything that truly mattered. Lena didn't mind, though. She had made a vow to care for their mother, no matter what. The hospital was where she felt needed, where she could make a real difference. But as the days wore on, and their mother's condition deteriorated, it became harder to ignore the widening gap between them. It wasn't just about the physical care anymore. It was about the emotional distance, the growing resentment. The final blow came one evening when Lena returned home early from a late-night shift. She had hoped to find some comfort in the quiet of the house, but instead, she found Emily and Ethan locked in a heated argument. Their voices, sharp and full of entitlement, echoed through the walls. They weren't arguing over anything meaningful, nothing that mattered. It was about the inheritance. Ethan's voice, thick with entitlement, cut through the tension in the air. "We've put up with this long enough. It's time we get what's ours." Lena froze, her heart sinking. The inheritance? Even in the face of their mother's imminent death, this was what consumed them. Money, what they stood to gain. It was a bitter, crushing realization. The very people who should have been rallying together, supporting their mother in her final days, were only focused on what they could take from her. Lena's hands clenched into fists as she turned away, her stomach turning. How had it come to this? How had her family fallen apart so completely? Lena had just finished another grueling shift at the hospital. Her feet ached, and the weight of the day was pressing down on her, but all she could think about was getting home. The thought of a hot shower and a quiet night in her small apartment had become her only solace. As she walked toward the parking lot, the familiar buzz of the hospital's fluorescent lights and the hum of distant conversations began to fade, replaced by the cold evening air that signaled the end of another long day. But when Lena reached her car, something stopped her in her tracks. There, parked a few spaces away, was a sleek, expensive luxury car. At first, she thought nothing of it. But then, as her eyes adjusted to the scene, the sight before her took her breath away. There, sitting in the car, were Emily and Ethan. Emily, her sister, her flesh and blood, was laughing, her head thrown back in that carefree way she used to years ago. Ethan, the man who had once sworn to love her forever, was holding her hand, the same man who had promised loyalty, devotion, and commitment. The realization hit Lena like a thunderclap. The world seemed to freeze around her. This wasn't just a betrayal of her trust, it was the ultimate betrayal. Her own sister and her husband, the very people who had once been closest to her, had been having an affair behind her back. Her chest tightened, the familiar ache of betrayal crawling up her throat. For a long moment, Lena couldn't move. The sound of their laughter, so casual and carefree, rang in her ears, each note more painful than the last. When the realization finally sank in, the flood of emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief, rushed over her in waves. It wasn't until she heard the sound of the car door opening that she snapped back into reality. Emily stepped out, a wide grin on her face. But when she saw Lena standing there, her expression shifted, just for a split second, from that of a carefree woman to someone who had been caught. Lena's voice came out low, barely above a whisper, but sharp with the weight of the pain she felt. "How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" Emily didn't hesitate. Her response was quick, dismissive, almost rehearsed. "It's over," she said, as though the words were nothing more than a passing remark. "We're getting a divorce." The words stung. "We're getting a divorce." As though Lena's entire world, her life, her family could be reduced to those simple words. The man who had once promised to cherish her had now betrayed her with her sister. And Emily, the sister who had once been her closest ally, had turned her back on her without a second thought. The finality in Emily's words echoed in Lena's mind as her heart shattered into pieces. Lena stood there, unable to find her voice, unable to even process the enormity of the betrayal she had just witnessed. Everything she had once believed about family, loyalty, and love felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The life she'd tried so hard to rebuild was crumbling, and all she could do was stand there, broken and alone. The day their mother passed was the final blow. The moment when the last remnants of their fractured family crumbled away. It was the end of an era, the loss of the woman who had held them together, and yet, in that moment, it became painfully clear that the bonds they had once shared were already gone. Emily didn't even bother to attend the funeral. It was as if their mother's death meant nothing to her. Lena had always known their relationship was strained, but this was a cruel confirmation of how deep the rift had become. Lena stood alone in the front row of the church, the heavy weight of grief pressing down on her chest. Her mother's absence left a void that seemed too vast to fill. It felt as though the air itself had thickened, becoming suffocating, as the quiet sobs of relatives and friends echoed through the walls. The casket was lowered, and with it, all the unspoken words and unresolved feelings that had festered between them. The emotional toll it took on Lena was immense. She had lost not just a mother, but the glue that had once held their family together. But amidst the overwhelming grief, Lena found herself returning to one constant: her work at the hospital. It became her refuge, her escape from the pain of losing her mother and the heartache of watching her family unravel. There, in the chaos of life and death, she could focus on something tangible. Saving lives, providing care. It was the only place she felt truly needed, truly in control. Her colleagues at the hospital noticed the change in her. They could see the sadness in her eyes, but they also saw the strength she carried, the dedication that had always been a part of her. Lena threw herself into her work, pouring her energy into her patients and her team. Her mother's voice, though silent now, echoed in her mind during the toughest days. Strength is found in the most unlikely places. It was a message that had always stayed with her, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was something to be learned, something to be gained. As the months passed, Lena's grief didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became the driving force behind her passion for her work. Slowly, her career began to rise. She found herself earning the respect of her colleagues, and her reputation as a dedicated, compassionate nurse grew. It wasn't the healing she had hoped for, not in the way she had imagined it, but it was healing nonetheless, an internal strength forged in the fires of loss and betrayal. And while her family had fallen apart, and the pieces of her life with Emily seemed irreparably broken, Lena found solace in the fact that, at least for now, she had a place where she was needed, a place where she could make a difference. And in that small, fragile hope, she began to rebuild herself, one patient at a time. 3 years had passed since their mother's death, but Lena still couldn't shake the emptiness it left behind. In those years, the distance between her and her father, Arthur, had only grown. The once steady bond they shared had slowly turned into a cold, unspoken gulf. Lena hadn't heard from him in months. Phone calls were brief, almost perfunctory, as if they were just going through the motions. The warm, fatherly figure she had once known seemed to have faded into someone distant, someone she could no longer reach. Then, the message arrived. It wasn't a casual check-in or an invitation for a family dinner. It was simple but charged. "We need to have a family meeting. Come home tonight." "There's something important to discuss." The words, so direct and unexpected, hit her like a wave. Something was happening. Something was about to change. Lena's heart raced. She knew this wasn't about the inheritance. There was something deeper, something more significant at play. Lena took a deep breath and headed toward the family home, the old Victorian house that had once been filled with laughter and love. But now, as she stood in front of it, it felt almost foreign. The familiar scent of the garden, the worn-in creaks of the wooden steps, the picture-perfect windows. All of it seemed out of place, as if it belonged to another life, one that no longer existed. As Lena stepped through the front door, the air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. The silence in the hallway was suffocating. There was no warmth in the house, no sign of the comforting presence of her mother. Instead, an overwhelming tension hung in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. The living room was dimly lit, the walls lined with old family photographs, happy moments frozen in time. But the atmosphere inside now was far from warm. There, sitting across from her father, were Emily and Ethan. The last time Lena had seen them together had been in the parking lot, the betrayal still fresh in her mind. Now, 3 years later, they looked different. Their polished appearances had faded. The glossy sheen of their luxurious lives no longer hid the anxiety in the cheese. Ethan, who'd once been so confident, almost arrogant, now looked uneasy. Emily's usual poised demeanor was gone, replaced with a nervous tension. Their smiles, once so effortless, felt forced, as if they knew something was coming. Lena could feel the shift in the room, the palpable sense that whatever had been brewing for months was now ready to come to a head. Arthur sat quietly, his posture rigid, but there was something in his eyes that Lena hadn't seen before. Resolve. The man who had been so distant for so long now seemed to be bracing himself for something. The air was thick with unspoken words, and Lena could feel her pulse quicken as she took her seat. Something was about to change, and this time, there would be no turning back. The heavy silence in the room seemed to hold its breath as Arthur rose from his chair. His frail frame was a stark contrast to the steady authority that still radiated from him. Despite the years of aging and the toll of his illness, there was an undeniable strength in the way he stood before them. He didn't look frail in that moment. He looked determined. "I've gathered evidence," Arthur said quietly, but with a certainty that filled the room. His voice was calm, but there was a glint in his eyes, one that both chilled and commanded respect. Slowly, he began pulling out stacks of documents, each piece of paper a testament to the years of deceit, the betrayal that his daughter and son-in-law had inflicted on him, and, more painfully, on their mother. The first stack was bank records, clear and damning. Arthur didn't even need to say a word as he slid them across the table. The evidence was there, plain and undeniable. Emily had siphoned money from their mother's care fund, the very money meant to ensure her comfort in her final days. Instead, she'd used it for extravagant purchases, luxury trips, and maintaining the lavish lifestyle she'd grown so accustomed to. The audacity of it was almost too much to bear. Lena could hardly breathe as she watched her father, stone-faced, flip through the pages. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words, though quiet, were razor-sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. As the documents spread across the table, Arthur continued, his voice steady. "And here's something else," he said, pulling out photographs and video footage. The images were clear, merciless. They showed Emily and Ethan, smiling, laughing in an expensive restaurant, completely oblivious to the fact that their mother was slipping away in the hospital. The timestamp on the footage left no room for argument. While their mother was breathing her last breath, Emily and Ethan were living it up, indulging in the luxury that had always been more important than family, more important than love. Lena felt the room spin as her sister's composed facade began to crack. Emily, the woman who had once projected confidence and entitlement at every turn, salzada na night. Bukabikusai and she bowed for who she truly was. Her hands trembled as she looked at the evidence, her face pale, her arrogance evaporating in an instant. The woman who had always assumed she could get away with anything was now a shadow of herself, trapped under the weight of her own lies. Arthur didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to shout to make his point clear. His calm, measured tone carried a power that none of them could ignore. "You left her to die," he said, his words deliberate, each one landing with the force of a hammer. "And you lived off the money that was meant for her care." Lena's heart raced as she watched Emily's expression change. For the first time in years, Emily was speechless, completely disarmed by the truth laid bare in front of her. She had no defense, no excuse. There was nothing left to hide behind. The truth hung heavily in the air, and as Lena sat there, her hands clenched into fists, she realized just how much she had underestimated her father. While she had been dealing with her own grief, her own loss, Arthur had quietly been preparing for this moment. And now, as the weight of the truth bore down on them all, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The family she had once hoped could heal, the family she had tried to save, was finally facing the consequences of its own destruction. And it was far from over. The room was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating after the crushing weight of the evidence that had been laid bare. Arthur's calm demeanor didn't falter as he slid the final document onto the table, a single sheet of paper that would bring the truth to its final conclusion. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as her father spoke. "All assets," Arthur said firmly, his voice steady and unwavering, "will be inherited by Lena." The words hung in the air, a statement of finality that could not be ignored. Lena felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief, anger, sorrow, flooding her chest, but she said nothing. The moment was bigger than her. It wasn't just about the inheritance, it was about so much more than that. Arthur didn't pause. His gaze shifted to Emily and Ethan, his eyes hardening as he continued. "But there are conditions." The words were simple, but the weight of them was undeniable. Emily and Ethan exchanged a glance, and for the first time, Lena saw a flicker of fear cross their faces. They were no longer the confident, entitled individuals they had once been. Now, they looked like children caught in a lie too large to escape. "You must apologize at her grave," Arthur said, his voice steady, each word carrying its own weight. "You must repay every cent of the stolen money." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The betrayal she had suffered, the years of pain and silence. It had all led to this moment. Arthur's words were like a judge's gavel, and Lena felt a sense of justice in the finality of them. Emily's face twisted in disbelief, her once perfect composure now shattered. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. Ethan, who had been so sure of his place in the family, now sat frozen, his arrogance replaced by a creeping sense of panic. It was clear they had not expected this. They had hoped, perhaps, that the will would simply be a formality, a transaction with no emotional weight. But Arthur had anticipated this. He had anticipated everything. Arthur's gaze never wavered as he spoke again, his voice soft but resolute. "You have two choices, he said, his words cutting through the air with surgical precision. Accept the conditions, or face the consequences. The room seemed to hold its breath as the words settled in. Emily and Ethan exchanged a desperate glance, their minds racing, searching for a way out. But there was no escape. There was only the truth, and the truth had caught up with them. Lena sat back in her chair, feeling a mix of exhaustion and vindication wash over her. The weight of the past 3 years had been unbearable, but now, as she looked at her sister and brother-in-law, their faces twisted in disbelief, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of relief. This was the reckoning. The moment when everything would finally come to light, and there would be no more running, no more pretending. Arthur's calm demeanor had won the day. The conditions were set, the power had shifted, and, for the first time in years, Lena could feel the scales of justice finally balancing in her favor. The silence in the room was deafening, but Lena didn't need to speak. The message had been delivered, loud and clear. A year had passed since that fateful night, and the world had shifted in ways Lena could never have imagined. She had moved into her father's house, the place that had once been filled with the laughter and warmth of family, now quiet, but still holding a sense of peace she hadn't known she'd longed for. The garden, her mother's pride and joy, was blooming once again. The roses that her mother had so lovingly tended to now flourishing in the spring sunlight. It was as if the earth itself had found a way to heal. Just as Lena was learning to heal herself, she spent her mornings in the garden, her hands in the soil, feeling the connection to her mother with each flower she pruned, each rose she nurtured. The act of tending to the garden had become her own quiet ritual, a way to honor the woman who had shaped her, and a way to find peace amid the chaos of the past. The house, once cold and distant, had come alive again with warmth, each corner filled with memories of her mother, memories that now brought comfort rather than pain. Meanwhile, Lena's career had flourished. She had risen through the ranks at the hospital, earning the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of everyone who worked alongside her. As head nurse, she was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. Every day, she carried a piece of her mother's strength with her, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. Strength is found in the most unlikely places. That strength had become the foundation of everything Lena did. And with every life she saved, every patient she cared for, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. But for Emily and Ethan, the story had taken a different turn. Their lives, once glittering with wealth and luxury, had crumbled. Emily's real estate empire, built on a foundation of deception and greed, had collapsed. Her once pristine reputation was shattered, and the connections she had cultivated among the elite slowly faded as her lies caught up with her. Ethan, too, had fallen from grace. His career, once flourishing, had been destroyed as his unethical behavior was exposed. The man who had once commanded respect had become a cautionary tale. The wealth they had flaunted, the extravagant lifestyle they had once paraded around as a symbol of their success, was no more. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, the lavish vacations, all of it had disappeared, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their actions. The last time Lena saw them, it was at their mother's grave. They came, not with the same defiance they had shown before, but with something that felt more like defeat. Their once confident expressions were gone, replaced by the weight of guilt and regret. They no longer had the arrogance they had once carried with them. Instead, they were humbled, broken by the reality of their choices. They had come to apologize, but the apology felt hollow. They had already lost everything that truly mattered. Lena stood quietly at the grave, her mother's keepsake ring gleaming softly in the light. She had no anger left, no hatred. All she could feel was a quiet sense of closure. The past had been painful, but it had shaped her into the person she was today, a person stronger than she ever thought possible. And as she looked at the broken remnants of the life Emily and Ethan had once enjoyed, she realized that some lessons could only be learned through loss. She said nothing to them, choosing instead to let the silence speak for itself. The finality of it all was evident in their eyes, and Lena didn't need to say a word. She had already won, through her strength, through her resilience, and through the quiet peace she had found within herself. And as the wind gently rustled through the trees, Lena knew that, at last, she had found her way forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her to a place of healing, of new beginnings. She wasn't looking back anymore. The future was all hers. Lena sat quietly in the garden, surrounded by the soft scent of blooming roses, the gentle warmth of the spring sun kissing her skin. In her hand, she held her mother's keepsake ring, its familiar coolness grounding her as her thoughts drifted back to the woman who had shaped her into the person she was today. Every petal, every leaf in the garden felt like a tribute to her, her strength, her love, and the lessons she had imparted. The pain of the past, once so sharp, had slowly faded, replaced by something stronger, quiet strength, built from the lessons learned and the battles fought. As the breeze swirled around her, Lena whispered softly to the wind, her voice barely more than a murmur, but it was filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mom. I can live strong now." And with that, the story closed, the new life Lena had forged shining brighter than ever before. She was no longer haunted by the past. She had found peace. She had found strength. If you've enjoyed this story of redemption, strength, and healing, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring stories that remind us all of the power of resilience.